This report is a damning set of conclusions and findings in the first phase of this inquiry about what the Trudeau government has indicated over the last 18 months and contradicts much of what the government has told us over that period of time.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. Justice Hoag's preliminary report on foreign interference into the 2019 and 2021 elections has been released, and there are some damning conclusions against Justin Trudeau. What is most interesting to Cypher and I, though, is what was not included in the report. Before we get to that, we hear from Conservative MP Michael Chong and his reaction to the report.
Let's take a look.
Commissioner Hoag's first report comes to conclusions and findings that are starkly different from what the Trudeau government has told us over the last 18 months, and conclusions and findings that are different from the report of Mr. Johnston of a year ago. She concluded that interference occurred in the last two general elections. And while this interference did not have an impact on which party came to power, it could have had an impact on the results at the riding level. And she concluded that it impacted the broader electoral system, that it undermined public confidence in Canadian democracy, and that it disproportionately targeted and negatively affected diaspora communities, particularly the Chinese community. Commissioner Hoag specifically concluded with respect to Mr. Dong's nomination in Don Valley North that the suspicion that Beijing interfered in Mr. Dong's nomination was well-grounded, and that this is significant because it could have determined the candidate who was elected to Parliament. She also concluded that Mr. Trudeau told her that he did not veto Mr. Dong's nomination because it would have direct electoral consequences, because the Liberal Party was expected to win Don Valley North. And she questioned why the Prime Minister did not take action as he said he was going to do after the election. With respect to Mr.
Okay, so we'll pause there. So, very interesting findings from the public inquiry report. Now, for those interested, and you're probably already asking, and you probably already know the answer, were you guys able to find the report? Well, of course we were able to find the report.
And we've got a link to the report in the description.
Yes, so I do warn you, the report is almost 200 pages long, and it is a preliminary report. This is not a final report. This is everything that they have documented and come to conclusions on thus far in the public inquiry. But there are some interesting aspects here. So one of the, I think, most significant pieces that we were interested in looking at this report about was some of the cases that CSIS had leaked into the public. So obviously one of them was Han Dong's nomination race in Don Valley North. Now, we've talked about this at great length, in that this was not during the federal election yet. It was in the party race. So two candidates from the Liberal Party were competing against each other in order to be able to become the candidate for Don Valley North. So what does that mean? Well, if you recall, there were some reports of buses that were allegedly paid for or arranged by the People's Republic of China to facilitate the transportation of students from China. Funny how they're allowed to vote here if they're not citizens, but anyway.
Well, let's just be clear for everybody. It wasn't a vote in the federal election. It was a vote in the party nomination.
Right.
So it's kind of, I guess, to put it crudely, it would be like voting for your student council. You don't have to be a citizen.
Well, but they should be. If you're going to be selecting somebody for a member of parliament that is going to be running in the federal race.
Oh, I don't disagree, but at this point in time, there are no rules within the Liberal Party charter, and I don't think of any of the other party charters that say you have to be a Canadian citizen in order to vote in the nomination selection race.
So there is in the Conservative one, actually.
Oh, is there?
Yep.
Interesting.
So-
Well, there's definitely not in the Liberal, not that we saw anyways.
Yeah, that we checked out. So anyway, continuing on, this is from the report, and it states in here, we're not going to read the whole thing, that basically this goes over the process in which CSIS notified the Liberal Party of their concerns about Han Dong. And it talks about Mr. Broadhurst, and that Mr. Broadhurst spoke to Liberal Party of Canada officials just to see if they were aware of any irregularities. And, he was told that it was a really tight race. Han Dong had won by a very close margin, but the losing candidate didn't contest the results. So they kind of use that as justification. Well, okay, well, if the candidate doesn't have any problem with it, then we won't move ahead, right? So what happened then is that Broadhurst then spoke with Trudeau, and allegedly they spoke about, the different pieces of it, that there was, it wasn't hard truth that anything happened, but essentially they broke it down to, well, maybe we just, we see what happens here, but we don't have a really, really high 100% degree of confidence, and we didn't meet this threshold for the belief that maybe something did happen that was foreign interference related and that they should remove Han Dong. But they don't actually say what that threshold is, like how high you have to go. Now, the most interesting part is this, and I will read this out because this is Justice Hoag's report here. In his in-camera testimony before me, now this is testimony that we actually didn't get to see broadcast live. Mr. Trudeau noted that unendorsing Mr. Dong would have a direct electoral consequences as the Liberal Party of Canada expected to win Don Valley North. It would also have devastating impact to Mr. Dong personally. Mr. Trudeau noted that he has had to eject candidates and MPs from the Liberal Party in the past for a variety of reasons, but he did not feel there was sufficient or sufficiently credible information to justify removing Mr. Dong. Mr. Trudeau emphasized in his public testimony that he was faced with a binary choice, remove Mr. Dong or leave him in place, but he testified that having chosen to allow Mr. Dong to remain as the Liberal Party candidate, this was a matter that, quote, we would have to revisit, end quote. So look at that justification, right? Well,
we will lose if we take him out of there. Okay, I get that maybe that's a concern for the Liberal Party, but what should be more of a concern is that a foreign country is trying to interfere with our election process.
And here's the other thing. You say that you're concerned, but you will revisit it. Okay, did you? No, you didn't. So it was further documented that Trudeau actually, not to anybody's surprise, they actually didn't revisit this and look into it following the election. And Justice Hoag said, well, why? And then Trudeau basically said, well, I don't know.
What kind of answer is that? Canadians deserve an answer. And now, again, the problem was not at the federal election level. The problem is that if a PRC endorsed candidate was elected in the nomination race, put on the ballot, and then elected into parliament. And the reason that's bad is because if you have somebody who's being endorsed by a foreign government, they're not going to vote in Canadians' best interest when they're sitting in parliament. They're not going to represent their Canadian constituents. They're going to be representing that foreign country.
Right. Now, you could argue that Trudeau wouldn't have been provided with all of the information at the time because there was a campaign going on and Broadhurst was only allowed to share a certain amount of information with him. But After the election was completed and closed off and you took power again, you should have damn well looked into what was going on. And now he says, well, we kind of looked at the CSIS evidence and asked them to look into this, but, there was nothing firmly substantial. Come on. And this business over the fact of just this decision-making process, that they were saying, well, CSIS didn't recommend us to take any action. They would never recommend you to take any action because their job is to provide you with the intelligence, and they're expecting you to make a decision based off of that. The problem that CSIS seems to have, which is why the whistleblowers threw their leaks out, is that they were giving you all of this intelligence, but you weren't making decisions. You weren't doing anything with it. That's what led to the frustration and the lack of confidence from CSIS that you were actually acting responsibly in the first place. So let's move on to the election and subsequent defeat of Kenny Chiu.
Chiu's election in Steveston, Richmond East, she concluded that there were strong indications of the PRC's involvement and that there is a reasonable possibility that the narratives could have impacted the results in this riding. And so this report is a damning set of conclusions and findings in the first phase of this inquiry about what the Trudeau government has indicated over the last 18 months and contradicts much of what the government has told us over that period of time. We look forward to her continuing her work in the second phase of this inquiry.
So let's take a look at what Michael Chung is referring to there. So this, again, is from the report. And it says, I am concerned by the reliance on the idea of a self-cleansing media ecosystem. What she's talking about there is a alleged disinformation campaign by the People's Republic of China that was very heavy against Kenny Chiu. And the issue is that over time, all of those messages end up, becoming lost and diluted within all of the information that ends up being published on these social media platforms. So she goes on to say, by the time that the disinformation fades away, it may be too late. I am also concerned by the absence of clear guidelines for when the government will act short of a public announcement by the panel. That's the panel of 5 that act during the election that was set up for this, that any foreign interference issues were brought to, and they make a judgment on what to do with it. These are issues also I will return to in the second phase of the Commission's work. After the election, the Conservative Party of Canada campaign put together a package material that they sent to government officials documenting their concerns. According to the site TF, the allegations were taken seriously, and CSIS in particular invested significant resources in following up. Ultimately, site's conclusions remained unchanged, though they underlined that they observed indicators of potential coordination between Canada-based Chinese language news outlets and PRC-associated outlets. This, in my mind, raises questions about the challenge of attributing activities to foreign states actors and the importance of the threshold for intervention. These questions merit further consideration. So this is where there is some evidence that it impacted Kenny Chiu's ability to win his riding. Now, while the overall result of the election would not have changed, that is true, you're talking about a scenario where a member of parliament from one party possibly lost to another because of foreign interference. That's the problem. And she outlines that. And that was in the conclusion. But this is not what Justin Trudeau would have you believe. This is not what Mendocino would have you believe. That's not what Mark Holland would have you believe over the last year to 2 years of repeated just BS statements. Oh, well, we implemented NSICOP, we implemented NSIRA and all this stuff, and the elections held and they didn't have any impact. Well, it sounds like they did.
Well, and also this is what David Johnston would have you believe as well, that there was no interference.
Yeah, nothing to see here. No public inquiry needed, and we'll just have some hearings and put a rubber stamp on it and call it a day. Now, let's get to what isn't in the report. So while we were combing through this, we were looking for, the significant events, Kenny Chu's election campaign, the issue with Don Valley North and Han Dong, but there was one other issue that we were looking at that we didn't find. And that was the conversation between Han Dong and the People's Republic of China ambassador at the Chinese embassy about the two Michaels. All of that is absent from the report. And that is very interesting to us. So what that means to me is that they have not reached any conclusion on what that testimony means yet, and that there's going to be further digging, perhaps in camera, again, away from the public eye, or maybe there's going to be more hearings in the future before this final report is actually released to include that, because they're not just going to have these public hearings, have witnesses, and then that not going to be in the report. So this is very, very interesting to me that this is absent at this point in time. What that tells me is this is not a nothing burger. It's not something they're just going to discard and say, we're not really too worried about that, because, again, there's an ongoing lawsuit between Han Dong and Global News. But as we saw on his testimony, he didn't dispute hardly any of the information and evidence and intelligence that was put in front of him. So what does that mean for Han Dong and this type of foreign interference? We don't know yet, folks, but I think it's obvious that there's going to be more digging that is done into this, and that's where this gets that much more interesting, because, again, Trudeau knew about this and did nothing.
Well, and Michael Spavor was able to reach a settlement with the government regarding his improper imprisonment.
Right. And now that'll be sealed, so we don't get to see what's in that. But
the fact that a settlement was reached means that there's something there. Like, something happened and the government was responsible.
And that lawsuit was only filed after the CSIS leak happened. So there's a lot of smoke there, folks. And as soon as we see anything that gives us indication that there is going to be a fire there, you can rest assured that we are going to let you know, because we are very, very interested in what's going to happen there. But those are the main highlights of the 200-page foreign interference report that Trudeau was mischaracterizing, none to anyone's surprise, what type of foreign interference occurred, the impact of that foreign interference, and the fact that some people were actually affected by this, and there was some impact at the ballots.
And it's not that the ballots were compromised. It's that the media, social media specifically, was used in a way that made the Conservative candidate look bad.
Right. It was weaponized to influence Canadians into voting for the wrong candidate, or rather, a candidate they may not have otherwise voted for. So, time will tell, folks, but we will stay on top of this, and as further developments arise, rest assured we will bring them to you.